Hello, and welcome to Caleb's Meditations. Today we'll be talking about the tragedy of the superfluous character and how it is shown in Pushkin's Eugene Onegin. First off, let's define what a superfluous character is. A superfluous character is somebody who doesn't fit into a social norm, or, in other words, is rejected by society or rejects society themselves. Onegin is the epitome of a superfluous man. Being bored with society and its superfluousness, he decides to leave his home of St. Petersburg and travel to the estate that he just inherited from his dead uncle. Now, in this novel, in Eugene Onegin, the very obvious superfluous character is Onegin himself. Other superfluous characters could be argued are Vladimir Lenski and also Tatiana, and I will introduce these characters as we get to them. First, let's look deeper into what makes Onegin a superfluous character. Onegin is a wealthy man who, after the death of his uncle, inherited a large farm. He is sociable and educated enough. The first thing to point out that is Onegin is rich. He's grown up in a life of comfort and education, parties, operas, and so forth. But he doesn't have any achievements. He lacks hard work. He hasn't really found meaning in life. Up to that point, he found meaning through fashion, all this, but realizing that there wasn't much deeper than that, he gets bored, he gets cynical, and he gets sick of his life in St. Petersburg. And so, Onegin moves to the countryside, to the estate that he inherited from his uncle. And at first, he loves it. He thinks it's so cool. As the book says, for 2 full days he was enchanted by the lonely fields and burbling brooks, but by the third he couldn't stick it. Where does this boredom come from, though? Often in these social situations, he was the center of attention. He knew his fashion and could have a conversation with anybody. But the main marker that shows that he is indeed a superfluous character is how he makes friends and how he interacts in his relations with others. Described what interested Eugene Onegin. It says, friends and friendships were less intriguing. Even the death of his uncle, the only living relative that he had, didn't even have an effect on him. At his uncle's deathbed, it says, already bored to uncle's bed, while thoughts of money filled his head. Onegin didn't build relationships. He didn't. He was unable to find pleasure in other people's company. He only seemed to find interest in stuff that was beneficial to himself. This boredom that he experienced while in the countryside would soon be relieved somewhat by a young man named Vladimir Lenski. Vladimir Lenski was a young poet who had just returned from Germany, studying abroad, and he was enamored with everything. The two became tight friends despite their differences because both existed outside of society. Lenski was bored of the society because it lacked idealism or romanticism, because in the countryside people wanted to talk about their crops, about their animals. They wanted to talk about everyday things, and Lenski here wanted to talk about deeper things, such as things you find in novels. But unfortunately, the superfluous character of both these men would prove their undoing and the disintegration of their friendship. Onegin's aloofness from the world made him feel as if he was alone, and he alone could understand himself. Often when we stand alone, we rarely think of ourselves as the most ordinary individuals, but we inevitably think of ourselves as the extraordinary. His sense of self, pushed on by his arrogance and short-tempered need for revenge, led Onegin to flirting with Lenski's fiancée. Of course, Onegin wasn't interested in Lenski's fiancée, but he did it more as a way to get back at Lenski for tricking him to go to a party that had much more people than was expected. Because of this, Lenski's short temper and his look towards idealism caused Lenski to challenge Onegin to a duel, which would unfortunately end in Lenski's death. But this is not the only tragedy of Onegin's superfluous nature. While visiting Lenski's fiancée with Lenski, he met a girl named Tatiana. Tatiana, who also related to being separate from society, fell deeply in love with Onegin. After her confession, Onegin shows his view of himself by saying, "For dreams in youth there's no returning, I cannot resurrect my soul. I love you with a tender yearning, but mine must be a brother's role." The tragedy here is that Onegin did feel something for Tatiana. He did love her for a moment after her confession to him. But he didn't think that she would ever be able to understand him. In fact, he straight up says, I will probably get bored with you, and you won't be happy and I won't be happy. After traveling abroad after the death of Lansky, Onegin travels to Moscow where he meets Tatiana again, but this time she's married. Tatiana has made a life for herself. She is married and in well-respected society. As he looks at her, Onegin says, or thinks to himself, can it be true? Eugene reflected, can that be she? It seems, and yet, from those backwoods. And now this woman who he loves, and who he had loved all the time, though he never admitted it, was married and moved on. Onegin's superfluous character had left him alone, devoid of friend or wife, both lost by his own hands. Now, like I said, Onegin is not the only superfluous character in this book. The second superfluous character, which ends in tragedy, as you already know, is Lansky. It was Lansky's nature that led to his own downfall in the end. Like Onegin, he was bored with society, as I mentioned. And while Onegin was led to cynicism, Lansky was an avid idealist. To him, everything was art. It says in the book, the world's fresh glitter and its call still held his youthful mind in thrall. This idealism pulled him away from the normal crowds, everyone that is, except for his beloved Olga. Olga was the picture of the perfect love interest in a romantic novel. And so to him, she was the perfect muse for his thoughts, the perfect subject to write his poetry about. And so beyond this, how could the everyday talk of the town truly interest an intellectual like him? The tragedy of Lansky was that he didn't really have anybody there to cool his temper, to be with him, to help him along the way. Yes, he had some friends, but for the most part he was isolated besides his tight friendship with Onegin. These people he looked down on, though not maliciously, could have helped him and created a stable life for him. Instead, he was influenced more by his notion of romanticism. Olga, his only close friend beyond Onegin, is too shallow for him. She was pretty, she was the perfect picture of a heroine in a novel, but she was really just superficial. She was like the rest of society as Onegin saw it. She enjoyed the parties, she enjoyed putting on a show, but there wasn't much depth to her soul. Olga's relatively benign shallowness, along with the ill-thought-out maliciousness of Onegin, incited the duel. These were Lansky's two main friends. In the past, he had always put up with Onegin's cynicism, but now it was unforgivable, a vice worthy of death. Lansky sees himself as the hero, as the protector. As Lansky says, it's up to me, he thought, to save her. I'll never let that foul depraver corrupt her youthful heart with lies, with fiery praise and heated sighs. This fire, this passion unchecked by any friend, would lead to his own death by his best friend. A pointless death that was quickly forgotten by the general public, including Olga, who later got married rather quickly after Lansky's death. The book says, the poet's gone and hardly one remembers him. His bride's devotion has flown to someone else instead. Lansky's inability to connect with society and his over-reliance on idealism and romanticism led to his own demise. And now the final character, Tatiana. As the narrator describes Tatiana, she is highly praised. She, too, is a superfluous character in a sense. She has rejected society. She is estranged from society, preferring nature and books to social settings. It says in the book when describing her, but dolls were never Tanya's passion. She was not the sort who glories in girlish pranks. She loved to greet Aurora's show when dancing stars are disappearing against the heaven's pallid glow. Perhaps this is why she fell in love with Onegin. Perhaps she related to him on a personal level. Tatiana decided that she needed to confess her love through a letter. The problem lies in her superfluous nature, where she doesn't have many friends. She has no friends to run the letter by or to ask advice on how to approach the situation in a logical sense. Overcome by passion, she sent a sweet but overly honest letter, which led to her rejection. Their love was doomed from the start. Neither were able to connect to society, preventing them from developing their feelings in a social and healthy manner. It was her love of literature and stories that led her to love Onegin, who was an enigma to her. Tatiana's tragedy was that she loved Onegin, but would never be with him. At the end of the book, Tatiana says, "And happiness was ours so nearly, it came so close." Yet there's a redemption from this tragedy. Where Tatiana shows her true self, her deeper character is revealed. A weaker person would have run away with their former love, but Tatiana's noble nature is expressed when she says, "But I am now another's wife, and I'll be faithful all my life." Tatiana shows that even though she isn't in the most idyllic of situations, it's not a bad situation, and she recognizes that she has given her word, that she is an honest person, that she needs to respect her vows. And so while Tatiana, in a sense, is also still a superfluous character in a sense, she has found a depth which Onegin and Liensky were unable to find. Onegin would never have been willing to enter into a relationship in which he feared he might get bored in, while Tatiana was determined to keep her vows regardless. Once she made her decision, once she made her promise, she would keep her promise. While one could say that it is still tragic that she never truly got to live her dreams, one could say that she is one of the few superfluous characters that receives a redemption, because though it is not the most idyllic, as I said before, it is a good life in the end. In conclusion, it's true. Society can seem superficial at times. It can lack substance. It can be frivolous. But society is essential. Having friends who can cool our anger, who can comfort and restrain us, keep us from following a self-destructive path, these are the friends that we need. Without a connection to society, without friends to tame the extremes, Liensky and Onegin were destined to destroy each other. Tatiana's nature attracted her to Onegin, but her noble spirit prevented it from destroying her. The tragedy of the superfluous character is that they end up alone, unable to find lasting, meaningful companionship, unless they are able to look within themselves and figure out who they truly are. It can bring out the deeper feelings in someone, draw out a healthy self-reflection. But without society, without connecting to others, it becomes sterile, with nobody to share it with. Society in the beginning existed to strengthen us. It was meant to help us uplift each other. But the superfluous character rejects this. They can never grasp it because they can't look past the superficial nature of society. And therefore, they end up going down a self-destructive path by cutting themselves off from everybody. This is the tragedy of the superfluous character.